Joining me to continue our conversation about free speech in sport is Associate Professor of Sport Management, Dr. Dae Hee Kwak. Dr. Kwak, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, we this whole notion of free speech and sport, what it means, is it appropriate? There's so much debate, lots of perspective, lots of different takes on this issue. Tell me whether or not you think sport is a viable platform for social and political activism.
I think sport is a powerful platform for politics and even international relations. I want to talk about the from a global perspective. 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics just ended last week in South Korea. With escalating threats and concerns over security over peninsula, and the two Koreas worked together to form a joint women's hockey team and marching under the same flag, which help set the mood for reconciliation between the two Koreas, and particularly with between North Korea and the U.S. And even the president agreed to sit at the table with the leader of North Korea, whether if it's going to eventually happen or not. But we can see that how the Olympics, the sport, was a stage to help alleviate some of those tensions. So, from a political standpoint, I think it does provide a strong and powerful platform for those political agendas. And coming back to your question about whether sport is an appropriate platform for activism, I think it is certainly, and I see it because given the huge media exposure opportunity, it has an enormous potential to raise awareness of those social issues. So I think it can be a very powerful platform. But at the same time, we see that there may be some repercussions in engaging in social activism. There may be some criticisms or backlash or opposition from fans, from media, and from other stakeholders.
And we're going to talk more about fans and,
Mhm.
and how this whole notion of free speech affects fans. You're a sport consumer researcher. You are a sport fan expert. But before we get into the element of free speech and how it affects fans, share with our audience, why do fans go to sport events? Like, what is the motive for being there? I'm sure it's not to see political activism,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, we watch and view sport for entertainment. Want to have fun, have a good time. And especially if you're following a team, then you want your team to win, and you want to see your team or athletes succeed in the field. So I see the entertainment being the huge motivation for fans to attend the game or view sport, whether it be having good time with your family or significant others, or it could be just escape from your work, or just for the sake of having enjoying the time during the moment.
So, with that said, if they're really there for entertainment, they're there to escape, the woes of everyday life. They're there for cathartic release. We know that some fans are not taking too kindly to seeing these political,
Mhm.
expressions
Mhm.
in sport. Your research also focuses on how fans react to athletes' transgression and
Mhm.
how they react
Mhm.
to situations that they
Mhm.
perceive to be immoral or
Mhm.
acts of civil
Mhm.
disobedience.
Mhm.
So, share with us what your research has revealed relative to how fans react
Mhm.
to athlete civil disobedience, because many of them perceive
Mhm.
kneeling during the national anthem to be
Mhm.
an act of civil disobedience or a
Mhm.
transgression. What has your research revealed about
Mhm.
how they respond?
Mhm. That's an interesting question to understand how consumers respond to a transgression or
Mm-hmm.
something that is not expected from an athlete endorser. So we some of the studies that we looked at was what were the some factors that influence how fans respond to those type of transgressions, whether it be a field on-field the transgressions such as doping or using illegal drugs, or off-field transgression, whether you're violating drinking under influence or domestic violence and so forth. So we found that the type of transgression matters to some extent, But at the same time, the severity of the transgression perceived by consumer also matters. And the other important aspect that we found was the level of attachment that you have with a particular athlete also matters in how you process the transgression or the scandal information about an athlete. And another important internal process that we found was moral reasoning, which I'll get to in detail later. But it really depends on how fans process the scandalous information to make the judgment whether it is acceptable or unacceptable.
Yeah. So I wonder, it creates this unique dynamic. So if an athlete is kneeling during the anthem, and fans perceive that to be a transgression because they don't think it's the American thing to do. It's been cast as anti-American, anti-veteran because there's the whole notion of free speech in this particular venue. So how do they respond? Do they stop supporting the team altogether? Do they support the team but just not root for the athlete? Like, what are the responses to these particular transgressions?
Right. For the kneeling during the national anthem, I think those who oppose protest athletes who are kneeling during the national anthem sees standing up for the national flag has a far greater value or is far more important than the issue, the social injustice issue that the players are trying to get across. So that case, based on the research that we have done, those fans who oppose the protest might engage in the reasoning process that the kneeling during the national anthem, it has something to do with the performance of the athlete, or try to chastise the behavior by integrating the judgments of the morality of the athlete and also the player's performance on the field. So that's what moral coupling indicates. But it's not all fans oppose protests, and you can see some fans who support the activism. They would easily separate the act of kneeling and the watching the game, the core, the product of the game that the people tune into. So it's easy for those fans to separate the action and the player's performance on the field, which is separate. So it helps them to maintain their support for the athlete and for the team. The team versus athlete per se, we need more evidence on that aspect. Whether the fans of the team will not going to support the team because of the athlete's expression on the social issue. From a fan behavior standpoint, I think it would be very difficult for a fan to not support the team because one of a player is expressing his or her ideas on a specific issue that is not really related to the performance on the field. So it would be easy for those fans to just separate the issue of social activism and what's going on the field, so thereby they can continue their support for the team.
Right. You mentioned earlier this whole concept of moral reasoning, and I hope our audience can hear the challenges, the things that the fans are trying to balance cognitively. How I feel about the athlete, how I feel about the behavior, how I feel about the team. So walk us through this concept of moral reasoning and the strategies that they use to have some cognitive consistency in this whole complex process.
Right. We need to look into the moral decision-making literature and how how people digest when you receive some of this counter-attitudinal information. You like the athlete, but the athlete engages in immoral action. So what people do? So your favorite athlete engages in an immoral or unethical behavior, and you want to maintain your support for the athlete. So in those situations, you are engaging in either moral rationalization or moral decoupling, which is called the moral disengagement processes. So what do I mean by moral rationalization is about diminishing the harm of the behavior by justifying the athlete's behavior. For instance, well, everybody else is doing it. He or she had no choice in that circumstance, or blaming the other. That type of strategy to cope with the immoral action by your favorite athlete. So you're trying to justify and condone the behavior by moral rationalization. And on the other hand, moral decoupling is you chastise a behavior. That action was morally wrong or was unethical, but at the same time, you praise athletes' performance or competency on the playing level. So you would say what he or she did was absolutely unacceptable, but the player is still the best in his or her sport. So you have just decouple the action and the performance, thereby you maintain your support for the athlete. So you can imagine that if you're either engaging in moral rationalization or moral decoupling, then you would not really have detrimental effect on the sponsors because they will support their athlete as well as their sponsors because you're not really criticizing on the actor in those situations. But it gets tricky when people engages in moral coupling, which is another moral reasoning strategy that we found in our research. It it it, it starts when a fan negatively views the behavior of an athlete and try to paint that to perceive and evaluate the athlete's performance. So all of a sudden, you're integrating the judgments of morality and the athlete's performance together. So the negative evaluation on the immoral action is negatively affecting the performance judgment on the athlete, which has a devastating and damaging impact on the endorsement value and for sponsor evaluations.
I want to follow up on the sponsor evaluations because we know that sponsors, they comprise another group who may be affected by athletes' free speech. And so, talk a little bit about the whole notion of how a sponsorship agreement may be affected by athlete free speech, or on the other hand, are sponsors becoming more socially, culturally conscious, so that they're embracing athletes' free speech.
That's the area that we need more research on to see how this activism really have implications on the sponsor's decision to whether they stand with the athlete or try to walk away from the athlete. And there's one case with the Denver Broncos, the linebacker who supported the kneeling during the national anthem. But as a consequence, he lost a couple of endorsement deals. So we see that there could be repercussions in the consequence of being in the endorsement capacity. Some I think it will depend on the culture and the vision of the organization that is sponsoring the athlete. Are some of the issues that are raised by athlete are they in line with the corporate organization's core values or identities? I think that would be the first starting point to make those decisions whether you want to stay or walk away or try to stay away from the activism. And the other issue would be your target audience. At the end of the day, you want to sell more of your products or services through the celebrity endorsers. So, does your target audience feel upset about this activism, or do they really it is throwing off the consumers of your products? Then you probably want to make action to whether to make a statement or to clarify your stand on how you want to proceed with this activism going on. So I can give you one example with one of the female tennis player who was in charge with using performance enhancing drugs, and there were some companies maintain their partnership with the player, but there's some companies just walked away from the athlete. So even with the same transgression that we're talking about, sponsors, I think they are more aware of becoming more aware of this type of issue, but they make different decisions based on what their values align with some of those transgressive behaviors. So I would imagine that along the similar line with social activism. So are those values violate or are in line with what the organization is striving for? I think that will be a determining factor in deciding whether they should continue or discontinue their partnership.
Right. And I know it's a difficult decision, that's, sponsors in some regards, their participation in activism could expand their markets. On the other hand, their participation in activism could allow them to lose some markets. So I know it's really a tough situation. I want to go back just a bit to talk about the fan. We've talked about how athletes' behaviors affect fans, how it could affect sponsors. I want to talk about the fans just a little bit. Again, you're a fan behavior scholar expert. Fans want to have free speech, right? But some of them don't. I mean, fans say a lot of things. We've all been to sport events. We hear some of the things fans say to the athletes. So the fans seem to relish their opportunity to have free speech. But yet some of them seem to not be so eager to extend that same right to athletes. Do fans have a double standard in this regard? Like, is there a double standard going on relative to free speech for the fans? I mean, they want it, but they don't necessarily want to see it on the field from the athletes. But they do it in the stands, right? We see it on the stands. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's a part of the fan behavior. They, they want to. I think if you just look into social media, the f- the team's pages or accounts, you'll see all these different comments expressing their anger or their emotions just bluntly in those social media accounts. I think that's a part of a sport consumption culture. But when you see these athletes being advocate or trying to stand up for certain issues, and that's just an extension of fan behavior, and they can say whatever they want. I think it's just not just on the social activism context, but any behavior the athlete or this celebrity athletes engages in, you'll get different feedback from the audience, anyways. So I see it as a part of how fans consume sport in this society.
Right.
Not necessarily just targeted on the social activism. So whether if you're doing good or bad, I think you'll get different layers of the responses from the fan base.
Yeah, I agree. I just think they feel that they have the freedom to say what they want on social media. So they want free speech, but oftentimes it seems to me that they're a little bit more critical of student athletes and athletes, professional athletes and coaches who also express their freedom, express their freedoms relative to free speech, expression, etc. So as we conclude here, what are some closing thoughts or call to action or anything you'd like to share relative to how this notion of free speech affects consumption, affects sport marketing, affects the athletes, just in your realm as a sport consumer researcher? What is the impact of free speech on sport consumption?
So from a fan behavior standpoint, or trying to understand how these types of social activism or free speech in sport influences the fans, I think it's a multifaceted phenomenon. It's not just the activism or free speech itself that the issue it matters, but it's how the fans perceive and also they interpret this type of the activism. So definitely more research needs to be done on this angle. And in the athlete endorsement marketing literature, there has been many research that looked at the transgression of an athlete and how what are the implications of those transgressions for marketers and sponsors. But there hasn't been many studies that looked at social activism or free speech in sport and what the implications are from a sponsorship or marketing standpoint.
Well, I think now we just have another research idea, some research we need to do,
Absolutely,
looking at
yeah.
how fans respond to this whole notion of free speech in sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hope, as you understand, as Dr. Kwak has illustrated for us, being a sport fan is not a mindless activity. It's psychologically, cognitively taxing, and the way in which fans have to manage and juxtapose what they feel for the team and for the athlete is really a challenge. So, Dr. Kwak, thank you so much for sharing your insight relative to how free speech impacts sport consumption. Thank you very much.
Thank you.